Hello and welcome to the Private Audiobooks channel. This audiobook video is about transform your life daily. Before we start the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you're ready, let's get started. Chapter 1. There is a quiet revolution that happens in the mind when you stop asking where the time went and start deciding where it will go. Most people live their entire lives believing that time is something that happens to them, something external, a current they are swept along by. They wake up with good intentions, they promise themselves change, and then the day unfolds in a way that feels beyond their control. By evening, they are tired, frustrated, and convinced that they simply do not have enough hours. This is not laziness. This is not a failure of character. This is a misunderstanding of how time actually works in the architecture of a human life. The truth is that time does not flow evenly. It does not distribute itself fairly across your ambitions and obligations. Time bends toward what you feed with attention, and it starves what you neglect. When you say you do not have time, what you are really saying is that you have not yet claimed it. You have not drawn a line in the formless stretch of your day and said, "This hour belongs to something that matters." This is not a criticism. It is an observation. And it is the first step toward something different. Consider the way most people think about progress. They imagine transformation as something large, something that requires vast stretches of uninterrupted focus, a month-long retreat, or a year of sacrifice. They wait for the right moment, the clear calendar, the absence of distraction. And while they wait, days pass. Weeks pass. The gap between who they are and who they want to become does not shrink. It widens. Not because they lack potential, but because they have misunderstood the mechanics of change. Change does not happen in grand gestures. It happens in the accumulation of small, repeated actions that compound over time. And the unit of that accumulation is not a day, not a week, but an hour. One single hour, used with intention, is the most underestimated force in personal transformation. It is small enough to fit into the chaos of any life, and it is large enough to build something real. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is how the brain learns, how skills deepen, how identity shifts. When you commit to one focused hour, you are not just completing a task. You are training your nervous system to recognize a new pattern. The brain is not a static organ. It is adaptive, constantly reshaping itself based on what you ask it to do. Neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural pathways in response to experience. Every time you sit down and work on something that challenges you, every time you push through the discomfort of not knowing, you are strengthening the connections that support that behavior. You are making it easier for your future self to do the same thing again. But here is what most people miss. The brain does not respond to intensity alone. It responds to consistency. You can work for 10 hours one day and feel productive, but if you do not return to that work the next day, and the day after, the neural pathways you started to build will weaken. The brain interprets inconsistency as a signal that the behavior is not important, and it reallocates resources elsewhere. This is why motivation fades. This is why enthusiasm dies. Not because you lack discipline, but because the brain has not yet been convinced that this new pattern is here to stay. Rhythm is the language the brain understands. When you show up at the same time, in the same place, with the same intention, the brain begins to anticipate. It prepares. It becomes efficient. What once required enormous willpower starts to feel automatic. This is not about becoming a machine. This is about working with your biology instead of against it. The human brain craves predictability in the midst of chaos. It looks for anchors, for rituals, for signals that tell it what comes next. When you give it a consistent 1-hour block, you are providing that anchor. Think about the last time you tried to start something new. Maybe it was learning a language, or writing, or building a business, or simply becoming the kind of person who moves their body every day. In the beginning, it felt hard. It felt like you were dragging yourself through thick mud. You questioned whether it was worth it. You wondered if you were capable. And then, if you kept going, something shifted. It did not happen all at once. It happened so gradually that you almost did not notice. One day, you sat down to work and realized that the resistance was quieter. The procrastination was less convincing. The work itself felt different, not easy, but familiar. That shift is not a coincidence. That is your brain adapting. That is the result of repetition. But repetition alone is not enough. The repetition must be structured. It must have boundaries. Without boundaries, repetition becomes wandering. You can spend an hour on your phone convincing yourself that you are researching. You can spend an hour in front of your work without actually engaging with it. The power of 1 hour is not in the time itself. It is in what you do with that time. It is in the quality of your attention, the depth of your focus, the willingness to sit with discomfort instead of reaching for distraction. When you protect 1 hour, when you treat it as sacred, you are making a statement. You are saying that this thing you are building matters more than the noise. You are saying that your future self deserves the investment. And every time you honor that hour, you are reinforcing a belief about who you are. This is where identity begins to shift. Not in some distant moment of achievement, but in the quiet repetition of showing up. Most people underestimate how much can be accomplished in one focused hour. They compare it to the 8-hour workdays they hear about, the all-nighters, the stories of people who sacrificed everything. And they think, what difference will 1 hour make? But they are comparing volume to depth. 1 hour of deep work, where you are fully present, where you are pushing against the edge of your ability, is worth more than 5 hours of shallow effort. The research on this is clear. Deep work produces exponential results. Shallow work produces linear results at best. Deep work is not comfortable. It is the opposite of scrolling. It is the opposite of multitasking. It is the state where you are so absorbed in what you are doing that time seems to bend, where you look up and realize that an hour has passed in what felt like 20 minutes. This state is called flow, and it is one of the most powerful experiences available to the human mind. But flow does not happen by accident. It happens when the challenge matches your skill level, when the task is neither too easy nor too overwhelming, when you have clear goals and immediate feedback. And it happens when you remove distractions and give yourself permission to focus. The irony is that most people never experience deep work because they never give themselves the conditions for it. They fill their calendars with meetings. They leave their phones within arm's reach. They tell themselves they will focus once everything else is handled, but everything else is never handled. There is always another email, another notification, another thing demanding attention. The only way to experience deep work is to claim it. To carve out 1 hour and guard it with the same seriousness you would guard anything valuable. And here is what happens when you do. You start to notice the difference. Not just in the output, but in how you feel. There is a quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing you did the thing you said you would do. There is a sense of alignment, of being in integrity with yourself. This is not pride. This is not arrogance. This is the simple, grounded feeling of living in accordance with your values. And that feeling is rare. Most people spend their lives in a low-grade state of guilt, knowing that they are capable of more, knowing that they are not showing up the way they want to. One focused hour begins to dissolve that guilt, not through denial, but through action. Over time, that 1 hour does something even more profound. It begins to change the story you tell yourself about who you are. If you ask someone why they have not pursued their goal, they will often say, "I am just not that kind of person. I am not disciplined. I am not creative. I am not consistent." These statements feel true because they are based on a lifetime of evidence. But that evidence was gathered in the absence of intentional practice. It was gathered in a life where time was reacted to rather than claimed. When you commit to one focused hour, you are creating new evidence. You are proving to yourself that you are capable of follow-through, that you can be trusted, that you are the kind of person who does what they say. This shift in identity is not abstract. It is felt. It is embodied. It changes the way you move through the world. When you see yourself as someone who shows up, you start to make different choices. You start to see opportunities instead of obstacles. You start to believe that change is possible, not because someone told you so, but because you have lived proof. And that belief becomes self-reinforcing. The more you show up, the more you believe. The more you believe, the easier it is to show up. There is a concept in psychology called self-efficacy, which is your belief in your ability to succeed in specific situations. People with high self-efficacy approach challenges with confidence. They persist in the face of setbacks. They recover from failure more quickly. And the most reliable way to build self-efficacy is through mastery experiences, through doing the thing and seeing that you can do it. One focused hour is a mastery experience. It is small enough to be achievable, and it is significant enough to matter. Every time you complete that hour, you are depositing evidence into the account of your self-belief. But the power of 1 hour extends beyond the individual. It ripples outward. When you change the way you relate to time, you change the way you relate to everything else. You stop being a victim of circumstance. You stop blaming external conditions for your lack of progress. You start to see that you have agency, that you have control over at least one small part of your day, and that one small part is enough to change the trajectory of your life. This is not about ignoring real constraints. It is about recognizing that within those constraints, there is still choice. There will be days when 1 hour feels impossible. When the demands are relentless, when the exhaustion is real, when sitting down to focus feels like the last thing you are capable of. On those days, the temptation will be to skip it, to tell yourself that one day does not matter, that you will make up for it tomorrow. And this is where most people break. Not because they lack commitment, but because they do not understand the compounding nature of consistency. One missed day does not destroy progress. But one missed day makes the next day harder. It weakens the neural pathway. It opens the door to doubt. And if the pattern continues, the hour that once felt difficult but doable starts to feel impossible again. This is why the commitment must be absolute, not in the sense of perfection, but in the sense of priority. 1 hour, no matter what. Not 1 hour when you feel like it. Not 1 hour when everything else is finished. 1 hour, claimed, protected, honored. This is not rigidity. This is integrity. And over time, that integrity becomes the foundation of everything else you build. The truth that most people avoid is this: you will never have more time. You will never wake up one day and discover that the demands have lessened, that the distractions have disappeared, that the path has become clear. The life you are waiting for does not exist. The only life available to you is this one, the one you are living right now, with all its complexity and limitation. And in this life, 1 hour is enough. 1 hour, used with intention, is the difference between drifting and building, between hoping and becoming. When you understand this, when you truly internalize it, the question is no longer where will I find the time. The question becomes, what will I do with the time I have claimed? And that question changes everything. It shifts you from passive to active, from reactive to intentional, from waiting to creating. This is the quiet revolution. This is the beginning of a life where you are no longer asking the world for permission. You are simply deciding, 1 hour at a time, who you will become. There is something that happens in the space between intention and action that most people never examine. They set a goal, they feel the surge of possibility, and then they wait for the feeling to carry them forward. But feelings are unreliable guides. They rise and fall with sleep quality, blood sugar, the weather, a conversation that went poorly. If you wait to feel motivated before you act, you will spend most of your life waiting. The people who build things, who change their trajectories, who become different versions of themselves, they do not wait for motivation. They understand that motivation is not the cause of action. It is the result. When you sit down for your one focused hour, especially in the beginning, you will not feel ready. You will feel resistant. Your mind will offer you 100 reasons to delay. You need to check something first. You need to organize your space. You need to be in the right mood. These are not rational objections. These are the brain's defense mechanisms, designed to keep you in the familiar, to protect you from the discomfort of effort. The brain interprets new challenges as potential threats, and it will do everything it can to steer you back toward what feels safe. This is not weakness. This is biology. And once you understand it, you can work with it instead of being controlled by it. The way you work with it is simple but not easy. You acknowledge the resistance without obeying it. You notice the discomfort without letting it make the decision. You sit down anyway. You open the document anyway. You pick up the instrument anyway. And what you will discover, almost every time, is that the resistance dissolves within minutes. Not because it was never real, but because resistance thrives in anticipation. It feeds on the gap between now and later. Once you are in the work, once you are moving, the resistance has nothing left to hold on to. This is one of the most valuable things you can learn about yourself, that you are capable of acting even when you do not feel like it. That your feelings do not have to dictate your behavior. That you can experience doubt and still move forward. This realization is liberating in a way that transcends productivity. It touches every area of life. Because once you know that you can do something difficult when you do not want to, you stop being afraid of difficulty. You stop avoiding conversations you need to have. You stop procrastinating on decisions. You stop waiting for permission from some future version of yourself who feels more confident. You realize that confidence does not come first. Action comes first, and confidence follows. Over time, the 1-hour practice teaches you something even more subtle. It teaches you the difference between being busy and being effective. In a culture that glorifies busyness, that equates long hours with dedication, it is easy to confuse motion with progress. You can fill your entire day with activity and still move no closer to what matters. You can answer emails, attend meetings, put out fires, and end the day exhausted but unchanged. Busyness is a kind of numbing. It creates the illusion of productivity while protecting you from the vulnerability of real work. Real work is focused. It is intentional. It is often uncomfortable because it requires you to confront the gap between your current ability and where you want to be. It requires you to produce something that might not be good yet, to make mistakes in front of yourself, to sit with the uncertainty of not knowing if this will lead anywhere. Most people avoid this discomfort by staying busy. They fill their time with tasks that feel productive but do not require deep engagement. And then they wonder why years pass without meaningful progress. One focused hour strips away the illusion. It forces you to confront what you are actually doing with your time. It asks you to choose one thing and give it your full attention. And in that choosing, you are forced to let go of everything else, at least for that hour. This is difficult for people who derive their identity from being needed, from being responsive, from keeping all the plates spinning. But the truth is that most of what you think is urgent is not. Most of what you think requires your immediate attention can wait. And the things that truly matter, the things that will change the shape of your life, those things are almost never urgent. They are important. And important things do not demand your attention. They wait quietly in the background until you decide to prioritize them. When you protect your 1 hour, you are practicing prioritization in its purest form. You are saying that this internal commitment is more important than external demands. You are saying that the person you are becoming deserves protected time. And this practice, repeated day after day, rewires the way you think about value. You stop measuring your worth by how much you accomplish in a day. You start measuring it by whether you honored the commitment you made to yourself. This shift is profound. It moves you away from external validation and toward internal integrity. There is also a relational dimension to this practice that often goes unnoticed. When you become someone who honors your commitments to yourself, you become someone who can be trusted by others. Not because you are performing trustworthiness, but because you are practicing it in private. The way you treat your own goals is the way you will treat your promises to others. If you consistently abandon what you said you would do for yourself, that pattern will show up in your relationships, in your work, in every area where follow-through matters. But when you build the habit of keeping your word to yourself, even in small things, even when no one is watching, you are building the foundation of character. Character is not something you are born with. It is something you build, decision by decision, hour by hour. And it is built most reliably in the moments when no one else is paying attention. When you choose to sit down for your 1 hour instead of collapsing into distraction, when you do the hard thing even though there is no immediate reward, when you keep going even though no one would know if you stopped, that is when character is forged. Not in the grand moments, but in the quiet ones. Not in the visible achievements, but in the private discipline. And here is what happens over the long arc of time. The person who protects one focused hour every day becomes a different person than the one who does not. Not because of talent. Not because of luck. But because of accumulation. A year of daily focused hours is 365 hours of deep work. That is enough time to write a book. To learn a language to conversational fluency. To build a body of art. To develop a skill that changes your career. To become someone you did not think you could be. And the distance between those two people, the one who claimed the hour and the one who did not, that distance grows exponentially with time. This is the part that is hardest to see in the beginning. When you are on day 3 or day 10, the results feel negligible. You have barely made a dent. The gap between where you are and where you want to be still feels enormous. And this is where most people quit. They look at how far they have to go and they convince themselves it is not worth it. But they are measuring the wrong thing. They are measuring distance instead of direction. And direction is everything. Every hour you show up, you are moving in a direction. You are building momentum. You are training your brain. You are creating evidence. And momentum is not linear. It compounds. The first weeks are the hardest because you are fighting inertia. But once you have momentum, once your brain expects the hour, once your identity begins to align with the behavior, it becomes easier to keep going than to stop. This is when the practice stops feeling like discipline and starts feeling like part of who you are. The goal is not to white-knuckle your way through life, forcing yourself to do things you hate. The goal is to build a structure that allows you to become the kind of person who does not need to force. Who shows up because that is what they do. Who honors the hour because it is non-negotiable, not because they are constantly battling themselves. And that version of you is not some distant fantasy. That version of you is being built right now, in the decision to start, and in the decision to continue. There will be moments when you question whether it matters. When progress feels invisible. When the voice in your head says this is pointless, you are not getting anywhere, you should just give up. That voice is not telling you the truth. That voice is the resistance, trying one last time to pull you back into the familiar. And the way you respond to that voice determines everything. You do not argue with it. You do not try to convince it. You simply acknowledge it and do the work anyway. Because the truth is not found in thoughts. It is found in action, in the lived experience of showing up, again and again, until the new pattern becomes the default. 1 hour. Every day. Not because it is easy. Not because it guarantees success. But because it is the most reliable path to becoming someone different. Because it teaches you that time is not something you find. It is something you create. And in that creation, you discover that you have more power than you thought. That you are more capable than you believed. That the life you want is not waiting for perfect conditions. It is waiting for you to decide, to commit, to begin. And once you begin, the only thing left to do is continue. Chapter 2. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes from knowing what you should do but not doing it. It is not the suffering of ignorance or confusion. It is the suffering of clarity without action. You know you should write. You know you should train. You know you should build the thing you keep thinking about. And yet, day after day, you do not. Not because you lack desire. Not because you do not care. But because something inside you fragments the moment you try to begin. This fragmentation is so common that most people believe it is simply part of being human. They call it procrastination, laziness, lack of willpower. But these labels obscure the real mechanics of what is happening. And if you do not understand the mechanics, you cannot change the pattern. The first thing to understand is that your attention is under siege. Not metaphorically. Literally. There are entire industries built around capturing and monetizing your focus. Every app on your phone, every platform you visit, every notification that appears has been engineered by teams of people whose job is to make it as difficult as possible for you to look away. They study your psychology. They test variables. They optimize for engagement, which is a polite word for addiction. And they are extraordinarily good at what they do. The average person checks their phone over 150 times a day. They spend hours scrolling through feeds designed to trigger dopamine release without ever delivering lasting satisfaction. This is not a personal failing. This is the result of living in an environment that has been weaponized against your capacity for sustained attention. Your brain did not evolve for this. It evolved for a world where threats were immediate and survival required quick reactions to changes in the environment. A rustle in the bushes could mean danger. A sudden movement could mean food. Your attentional system was designed to be pulled toward novelty, toward change, toward anything that might matter for your survival. In that ancient context, this was adaptive. But in the modern world, the same system makes you vulnerable. Every notification, every new post, every flashing banner is a digital rustle in the bushes. And your brain cannot tell the difference between a genuine threat and a marketing algorithm. So it pulls your attention, again and again, toward things that do not matter. The cost of this is not just distraction. It is fragmentation. Every time your attention is pulled away, even for a moment, there is a cognitive cost. Researchers call this the attention residue effect. When you switch from one task to another, part of your attention remains stuck on the previous task. Your brain does not transition cleanly. It lingers. And if you are switching constantly, if you are moving between email and social media and messages and work, you are never fully present anywhere. You are operating in a state of perpetual fragmentation, and you wonder why deep work feels impossible. It feels impossible because you have trained your brain to expect interruption. You have conditioned it to crave the next hit of novelty. And now, when you try to focus on something that requires sustained effort, your brain rebels. This rebellion feels like restlessness. It feels like the urge to check something, to look something up, to see what is happening elsewhere. And most people interpret this urge as a need, as something that must be satisfied. But it is not a need. It is a craving. And like any craving, it can be observed without being obeyed. The problem is that most people do not know how to sit with discomfort. They reach for the phone the moment they feel bored. They open a new tab the moment they feel stuck. They never give their brain the chance to settle, to move past the initial resistance and into the deeper state of focus. And so they live their entire lives skimming the surface of their own potential. Breaking this pattern requires more than willpower. It requires changing your environment. You cannot outdiscipline a badly designed environment. If your phone is next to you, you will check it. If your browser has 10 tabs open, you will switch between them. If your workspace is cluttered with distractions, you will be distracted. This is not a moral failure. This is how attention works. It flows toward what is easiest, toward what is most available. So if you want to focus, you have to make focus the path of least resistance. You have to remove the alternatives. This is why the most effective people are obsessive about their environments. They do not rely on motivation. They rely on structure. They put their phone in another room. They use apps that block distracting websites. They create physical spaces that are dedicated to focused work and nothing else. They understand that the mind is not separate from the environment. It is shaped by it, moment to moment. And if you want a different quality of mind, you need a different quality of environment. But even in a perfect environment, there is another force working against consistency. It is subtler than distraction, and in some ways more insidious. It is decision fatigue. Every day, you make thousands of decisions. What to wear? What to eat? What to work on. How to respond to this message. Whether to say yes to that request. Each decision, no matter how small, depletes a finite resource. Researchers call this ego depletion, the idea that self-control and decision-making draw from the same limited pool of mental energy. And by the end of the day, that pool is often empty. This is why you can start the morning with clear intentions and end the evening collapsed on the couch, unable to do the thing you promised yourself you would do. It is not that you became a different person. It is that you ran out of fuel. You spent the day making decisions, resisting impulses, navigating social interactions, managing your emotions. And by the time you had a free hour, you had nothing left. The discipline required to sit down and focus felt insurmountable, not because the task itself was hard, but because your capacity for self-regulation was exhausted. Most people do not account for this. They treat their evening hours the same way they treat their morning hours, and then they feel like failures when they cannot perform. But the brain does not work that way. It has rhythms. It has limits. And if you ignore those limits, you will lose every time. The solution is not to try harder. The solution is to stop making unnecessary decisions. To automate as much as possible. To build routines that eliminate choice. This is why successful people often seem boring. They eat the same breakfast. They wear the same clothes. They follow the same schedule. Not because they lack creativity, but because they understand that every decision they do not have to make is energy they can spend on something that matters. They are not trying to optimize their entire lives. They are trying to protect the mental resources required for the work that only they can do. And they do this by making everything else as simple and automatic as possible. When you build a routine around your one focused hour, you are doing the same thing. You are removing the decision. You are not asking yourself whether you feel like working today. You are not debating whether this is the right time. You are simply following the pattern. Same time. Same place. Same ritual. And over time, this routine becomes a cue. Your brain learns that when this sequence of events happens, focus follows. You sit down, and the resistance is quieter because the decision has already been made. Not in the moment, but weeks ago, when you committed to the structure. But there is a deeper trap that catches even people who understand distraction and decision fatigue. It is the trap of motivation dependence. Most people believe that motivation is the starting point. That you need to feel inspired before you begin. That you need to want it badly enough. And so they wait. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel excited. They wait for the surge of energy that will carry them through. And while they wait, nothing happens. This belief, that motivation comes first, is one of the most damaging myths in self-development. It keeps people stuck in a cycle of false starts and abandoned projects. They begin with enthusiasm, they ride the wave of initial excitement, and then, when the excitement fades, they stop. And they interpret this stopping as evidence that they were not meant to do the thing. That it was not the right path. That they do not have what it takes. But the truth is that motivation is unreliable by design. It is an emotion, and emotions fluctuate. They are influenced by sleep, stress, blood sugar, 1,000 variables outside your control. If you wait for motivation, you are handing control of your life to forces you cannot predict or manage. The people who build things, who make progress, who change their trajectories, they do not wait for motivation. They have learned to act without it. They understand that motivation is not the cause of action. It is the result. When you start moving, when you take the first step even though you do not feel like it, motivation often follows. Not always, but often enough. And even when it does not, the work still gets done. This inversion, this understanding that you do not need to feel like doing something in order to do it, is one of the most liberating realizations you can have. It means you are no longer at the mercy of your moods. It means you can build a life based on commitment rather than feeling. But this requires a shift in identity. Most people see themselves as people who do things when they feel like it. When they are inspired, they create. When they are energized, they work. When they are motivated, they show up. And they see nothing wrong with this because it feels authentic. It feels like they are honoring their true self. But what they are actually doing is abdicating responsibility. They are letting their emotional state determine their actions, and then they are surprised when their actions do not lead to the outcomes they want. The alternative is to see yourself as someone who does what they committed to do, regardless of how they feel. This does not mean ignoring your emotions. It means recognizing that emotions are information, not instructions. You can feel tired and still work. You can feel unmotivated and still show up. You can feel doubt and still move forward. And when you do this repeatedly, when you prove to yourself that you are capable of acting independently of your emotional state, your sense of self begins to shift. You stop identifying as someone who needs the right conditions. You start identifying as someone who creates the conditions. This shift is uncomfortable because it requires you to let go of excuses. As long as you believe that you need to feel motivated in order to act, you have a built-in justification for inaction. You can tell yourself, and others, that you just were not feeling it today. That you will do it tomorrow when you have more energy. That you are waiting for the right moment. But once you accept that motivation is not a prerequisite, once you see that you are capable of doing the work anyway, there is nowhere left to hide. You are forced to confront the reality that the only thing standing between you and your goal is the decision to begin. And this is where most people falter. Not because they cannot do the work, but because they cannot face the vulnerability of trying without the safety net of motivation. Because if you try when you are motivated and you fail, you can blame the failure on external circumstances, on bad timing, on not being ready. But if you try when you have no motivation, if you show up in spite of how you feel and you still do not get the result you want, then you have to confront the possibility that maybe you are not good enough. Maybe you do not have what it takes. This fear of discovering your own limitations, is what keeps people trapped in the waiting room of their own lives. But here is the truth that fear does not want you to know. You do not discover your limitations by trying. You discover your capacity. Every time you act without motivation, you are expanding your sense of what is possible. You are proving that you are more than your feelings, that you can be trusted, that you are capable of follow-through. And this proof accumulates. It becomes the foundation of a different kind of confidence, not the fragile confidence that comes from success, but the deep confidence that comes from knowing you will show up no matter what. There is also a practical dimension to this that often gets overlooked. When people say they do not have time, what they usually mean is that they do not have uninterrupted, stress-free, perfectly convenient time. They are waiting for a day when all their obligations are met, when they are well rested, when nothing is demanding their attention. And of course, that day never comes. There is always something. There is always a reason to delay. And so they go through life believing that they are too busy, that they do not have time for the things that matter. But this is not a time problem. This is a priority problem. Priority is not about what you say matters. It is about what you do when you have to choose. When you have 1 free hour and you spend it scrolling, you are revealing your priorities. When you say you want to write a book but you have not written in weeks, you are revealing your priorities. This is not a judgment. This is an observation. And it is important because once you see it clearly, you can change it. But you cannot change it as long as you are telling yourself a story about not having time. The truth is that you have time for what you prioritize. You have time to check your phone dozens of times a day. You have time to watch shows. You have time to worry. You have time for the things that feel easy and the things that feel urgent. And you do not have time for the things that require effort and the things that are important but not urgent. This is not because those things matter less. It is because they do not demand your attention. They wait quietly. They do not send notifications. They do not create pressure. And so they get pushed to the margins, again and again, until you have spent years thinking about what you want to do without ever actually doing it. Breaking this pattern requires brutal honesty. It requires you to stop pretending that time is the issue. It requires you to look at your calendar, at your screen time, at the way you actually spend your days, and to acknowledge that you are making choices. Maybe they do not feel like choices. Maybe they feel like obligations, like things you have to do. But even obligations are choices. You are choosing to meet certain expectations. You are choosing to avoid certain conflicts. You are choosing to prioritize the comfort of not disappointing others over the discomfort of disappointing yourself. And these choices are costing you the life you say you want. This is not about becoming selfish or neglecting your responsibilities. It is about recognizing that you are responsible to yourself as well. That your goals, your growth, your becoming, these things are not frivolous. They are not indulgences to be pursued only after everything else is handled. They are part of what makes your life meaningful. And if you never protect time for them, if you always put them last, you will reach the end of your life having lived for everyone else's priorities but your own. The one focused hour is a practice in reclaiming priority. It is a statement that for this 1 hour, your commitment to yourself takes precedence. Not because you are more important than anyone else, but because this is the only way to build the life you actually want to live. And once you start protecting that hour, once you make it non-negotiable, something shifts. You start to see other places where you have been giving away your time without realizing it. You start to see that many of the things you thought you had to do are actually things you chose to do out of habit or obligation or fear. And you start to make different choices. Over time, this practice teaches you to distinguish between what is actually important and what is just loud. Urgent things are loud. They demand immediate attention. They create stress and pressure. But they are often not important. They are other people's emergencies. They are minor problems that feel major because they are happening right now. Important things are quiet. They do not create pressure. They do not have deadlines imposed by someone else. They are the things that will matter in a year, in 5 years, in a lifetime. And they are almost always the things that require deep work, sustained focus, and the willingness to delay gratification. When you commit to your one focused hour, you are training yourself to prioritize the important over the urgent. You are building the capacity to say no to distractions, to say not now to interruptions, to protect the space required for meaningful work. And this capacity extends beyond the hour itself. It changes the way you think about your entire day, your entire life. You start to ask different questions. Not what can I fit in, but what actually matters. Not how can I do more, but what can I do less of so that I have space for what counts. This is the deeper lesson of consistency. It is not about being perfect. It is not about never missing a day. It is about understanding that your life is made of choices, and that those choices compound. Every time you choose the scroll over the work, you are choosing a particular future. Every time you choose comfort over effort, you are choosing a particular version of yourself. And every time you choose to honor your commitment, to show up for your 1 hour, to do the work even when you do not feel like it, you are choosing differently. You are building a different future, one small decision at a time. The people who succeed, who build things, who become who they want to become, they are not special. They are not blessed with more time or more discipline or more talent. They have simply learned to see through the illusions. They see that distraction is not inevitable. They see that decision fatigue can be managed. They see that motivation is not required. They see that time is not the problem. And once you see these things, once you truly understand them, consistency stops being a mystery. It becomes a practice. And that practice, repeated over time, becomes the foundation of everything you build. Chapter 3: The Mental Architecture of the 1 Hour Rule. There is a particular kind of power that emerges when you choose the same hour, every single day, and fill it with deliberate practice. Not occasionally. Not when you feel inspired. Not when circumstances align. But every day, at the same time, without negotiation. This is not about motivation. This is about something far more reliable, something that operates beneath the surface of your conscious awareness, quietly reshaping the very structure of how your mind works. Most people believe discipline is a feeling. They wait for the moment when they feel strong enough, focused enough, ready enough. They treat their goals like distant destinations that require the perfect weather conditions before they can begin the journey. But this understanding is backwards. Discipline is not a feeling you wait for. It is a structure you build. And once that structure is in place, it holds you even when your feelings would let you fall. The 1-hour rule operates on a simple but profound principle. You select 1 hour in your day, the same hour, and you dedicate it to the thing that matters most to your growth. Not the thing that feels urgent. Not the thing that screams the loudest. The thing that, if you did it consistently for a year, would fundamentally change who you are. During that hour, nothing else exists. No emails, no distractions, no compromises. Just you and the work that builds the future version of yourself. What makes this approach so effective is not the hour itself. An hour is neither long nor short. It simply is. What makes it effective is the repetition at the same time, in the same way, day after day. Because when you do this, something remarkable begins to happen in your brain. Your neural pathways start to anticipate this hour. They prepare for it. They expect it. And over time, what once required enormous willpower begins to require almost none at all. This is the mechanism of automaticity. Your brain is an efficiency machine. It seeks patterns. It craves predictability. When you perform the same action at the same time repeatedly, your brain begins to encode that action as a default behavior. The prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making and requires significant energy, starts to hand over control to the basal ganglia, which manages automatic behaviors and uses far less energy. This is why you can drive a familiar route while thinking about something entirely different. The behavior has moved from conscious effort to automatic execution. The same process happens with your dedicated hour. In the beginning, you will face resistance. Your mind will generate countless reasons why today is different, why you should skip just this once, why it doesn't really matter. This resistance is not a character flaw. It is your brain trying to conserve energy, trying to maintain the status quo, trying to protect you from the discomfort of change. Understanding this removes the moral judgment from the struggle. You are not weak when you feel resistance. You are simply human. But here is what most people miss. That resistance is not a wall you must break through with sheer force. It is a phase you must outlast with consistency. Every time you honor the hour despite the resistance, you are not just completing a task. You are sending a signal to your brain. You are teaching it that this hour is non-negotiable. You are building what neuroscientists call synaptic strength, the robustness of the connections between neurons that fire together during this behavior. Think of it this way. The first time you walk through a dense forest, you must push through branches, step over roots, navigate around obstacles. The path does not exist yet. But if you walk the same route every single day, something begins to change. The grass becomes trampled. The small branches give way. The ground becomes packed. Eventually, you have created a clear path that requires no thought to navigate. This is what happens in your brain when you practice the 1-hour rule. You are not just doing the work. You are carving neural pathways that make the work increasingly effortless. Now, let us talk about time selection, because this is where many people unknowingly sabotage themselves. They choose a flexible hour, one that shifts based on how the day unfolds. They tell themselves they will fit it in whenever they can. This approach fails not because of lack of dedication, but because it treats time as something you find rather than something you create. When you leave your dedicated hour to chance, you are asking your brain to make a decision every single day. Should I do it now? What about later? Maybe after this next thing? Each decision depletes your willpower, and by the time you actually sit down to do the work, you have already exhausted yourself with the mental negotiation. But when you fix the hour, when you decide once and then execute daily, you eliminate the decision. The time is already chosen. There is nothing to negotiate. Your brain knows what happens at 10 in the morning, or 6 in the evening, or whatever hour you have claimed. This removal of decision-making is not a small thing. It is the difference between running uphill every day and walking on flat ground. Both move you forward, but one allows you to go much, much further before fatigue sets in. There is also something happening at the level of identity that most people do not consciously recognize. Every time you show up for your hour, you are not just practicing a skill or working toward a goal. You are casting a vote for the type of person you are becoming. You are someone who keeps promises to themselves. You are someone who values growth over comfort. You are someone who understands that transformation happens in accumulated moments, not in dramatic gestures. This identity shift is gradual and quiet. It does not announce itself. There is no moment when you suddenly feel transformed. But if you look back after 3 months, 6 months, a year, you will notice something profound. The person who struggled to maintain focus for even 20 minutes can now work in deep concentration for the entire hour without effort. The person who once needed external pressure to act now moves with internal drive. This is not because willpower increased. This is because identity changed. And here is the beautiful paradox. The hour feels insignificant when you are in it. 1 hour out of 24. Just 4% of your day. It does not feel like enough to matter. Your mind will tell you that real change requires more. It will show you people who work 10 hours a day on their craft. It will whisper that you are not doing enough. But this is where most people lose their way. They abandon the sustainable for the heroic. They try to do too much, burn out, and quit entirely. The 1 hour rule succeeds precisely because it is sustainable. It is small enough that you cannot justify skipping it. It is short enough that you can protect it from other demands. But it is long enough that, done with full attention and intention, it compounds into something extraordinary. 1 focused hour per day equals 7 hours per week. 30 hours per month. 365 hours per year. That is over 15 full days of dedicated practice. 15 days where you could have been distracted, scattered, reactive, but instead you were focused, deliberate, intentional. Most people live their entire lives without giving 15 cumulative days of focused attention to the thing they claim matters most. They are busy, yes. They are working, certainly. But their attention is fragmented, their efforts dispersed across 1,000 different directions, none of which receive the sustained focus required for true mastery or transformation. The 1 hour rule forces you to confront this reality. It asks you to choose. Not someday, not eventually, but today. What deserves your most focused attention? What is worth protecting from the noise? Now, let us address what happens during this hour, because the quality of the time matters as much as the consistency. This is not about checking a box. This is not about being able to say you did your hour. This is about presence. Full, undivided, almost meditative presence. When you sit down for your dedicated hour, you are making a contract with yourself. For these 60 minutes, the rest of the world can wait. Your phone is off or in another room. Your notifications are silenced. Your door is closed. You have created a boundary between you and everything that typically pulls at your attention. In the beginning, this will feel strange. You will notice how accustomed you have become to constant stimulation, constant input, constant connectivity. Your mind will itch for distraction. It will try to convince you that you need to check just one thing, respond to just one message. This is not because these things are truly urgent. This is because your brain has been trained to seek the dopamine hits that come from novelty and social connection. Breaking this pattern requires you to sit with discomfort, to allow the restlessness to be there without acting on it. And then something shifts. Usually around 10 or 15 minutes into focused work, your mind settles. The urge to check your phone fades. The mental noise quiets. You enter what some researchers call a flow state, though that term has become so overused it has lost some of its meaning. What you actually enter is a state of deep work, where your cognitive resources are fully aligned with the task at hand. Time begins to feel different. An hour can pass and feel like 20 minutes. Not because you are rushing, but because you are absorbed. This absorption is where the real growth happens. When your mind is fragmented, switching between tasks, constantly interrupted, you never go deep enough to do anything truly valuable. You skim the surface of everything and master nothing. But when you give yourself an uninterrupted hour, you can go beneath the surface. You can wrestle with complex problems. You can refine your thinking. You can practice the subtle adjustments that separate competence from excellence. This depth is not accessible through scattered effort. It requires protected time and sustained focus. Over weeks and months, you will begin to notice something else. The quality of your thinking during this hour improves. Your mind learns that this is the time for serious work, and it shows up differently. Ideas come more easily. Solutions appear more quickly. You make connections you would have missed in a distracted state. This is not magic. This is your brain optimizing for the pattern you have established. It knows that during this hour, it needs to perform at a higher level, and so it does. There is also a psychological dimension to this process that is worth understanding. When you commit to the same hour every day, you are building what psychologists call self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to succeed at specific tasks. Every time you show up and complete your hour, you are gathering evidence that you are capable of doing hard things consistently. This evidence accumulates. It becomes a foundation of confidence that extends beyond the specific task you are practicing. Think about the person who cannot stick to anything, who starts projects with enthusiasm and abandons them when the initial excitement fades. This person is not fundamentally flawed or lacking in potential. They simply have not built the self-efficacy that comes from repeated success. They lack the evidence that they are the type of person who finishes what they start. So when challenges arise, they believe the voice that says they should quit, because that belief is supported by past experience. But when you practice the 1-hour rule, you are systematically dismantling that belief. You are creating a new pattern of evidence. You are becoming the person who shows up even when it is hard. Even when it is boring. Even when progress is invisible. And this identity, this sense of self as someone reliable and committed, begins to influence other areas of your life. You start to approach other challenges with the same steady determination. You stop being surprised by your own consistency. It becomes who you are, not what you do. Now, there is something important to address about progress, because this is where many people lose faith in the process. Progress during your dedicated hour will not be linear. Some days you will feel sharp, focused, capable. Other days you will feel slow, foggy, frustrated. Your mind will want to interpret the difficult days as evidence that the process is not working, that you are not improving, that you should try something different. This interpretation is a trap. The difficult days are not failures. They are part of the process. Your brain and body do not improve in a straight line. They improve in cycles. There are days of integration where your system is processing and consolidating previous learning. These days often feel harder because you are working at a new level, even if it does not feel that way yet. The key is to show up with the same commitment regardless of how the hour feels. Because the showing up is the point. The consistency is what compounds. Let me tell you what silent progress looks like. It looks like showing up on the day you really do not want to. It looks like sitting down at your designated time even though you feel tired, even though you had a difficult morning, even though a dozen other things seem more pressing. It looks like staying with the work when it feels clumsy and unrewarding. These moments, these unglamorous, ordinary moments of simply doing what you said you would do, this is where transformation happens. Most people are looking for the dramatic breakthrough, the moment when everything clicks and suddenly they are different. They want the before and after story. But real change does not work that way. Real change is silent, incremental, almost invisible on any given day. You cannot see a plant growing if you watch it constantly. But if you water it consistently and then look back after a month, the growth is undeniable. Your dedicated hour works the same way. You will not feel dramatically different after any single session. But if you stay with it, if you trust the process, one day you will look back and realize you are not the same person who started. There is a particular kind of freedom that comes from this realization. When you stop needing to feel motivated, when you stop waiting for inspiration, when you accept that the work happens whether you feel like it or not, you become unstoppable. Not in the dramatic, cinematic sense, but in the quiet, relentless sense of someone who cannot be deterred because their commitment does not depend on external conditions. This is what the 1-hour rule builds. Not just skill in a particular domain, though that certainly develops. Not just progress toward a specific goal, though that happens too. What it builds is a version of you that understands how time actually works. Time is not something you find. Time is not something you wait for. Time is something you decide. You decide what matters. You decide when it happens. You decide that this hour, every day, belongs to your growth. And then you protect that decision as if your future depends on it, because it does. The mental architecture of this practice is simple but not easy. It requires you to see past the immediate discomfort to the accumulated effect. It requires you to value consistency over intensity. It requires you to trust that small actions, repeated daily, will create outcomes that sporadic bursts of effort never will. And it requires you to become comfortable with the fact that most days will feel ordinary. There will be no applause. No immediate reward. Just you and the work and the quiet knowledge that you are building something that matters. This is the essence of the 1-hour rule. Not a hack. Not a shortcut. But a fundamental reordering of how you relate to time, discipline, and your own potential. When you embrace this practice fully, you stop saying you do not have time. You stop believing that change requires dramatic sacrifice. You simply show up, every day, at the same time, and do the work. And day by day, almost imperceptibly, you become someone new. Chapter 4. There is a particular kind of silence that exists before any real work begins. Not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a mind that has stopped negotiating with itself. This is where the hour starts. Not with enthusiasm or motivation, but with a decision that has already been made, perhaps days or weeks before, when you understood that something in your life needed to change at a structural level. The question is never really about finding time. Time exists in the same quantity for everyone who wakes up in the morning. The question is about what you are willing to stop doing, what you are willing to let go of, and what you are prepared to defend with the kind of quiet stubbornness that doesn't announce itself but simply refuses to be moved. When you carve out an hour, you are not discovering it somewhere in your schedule. You are creating it by deciding that this hour matters more than the other things that could fill it. This is not about time management. It is about identity management. The hour you protect is not just a block of time. It is a statement about who you are becoming. Every time you sit down and begin, you are casting a vote for a particular version of yourself. Every time you choose the easy distraction, the comfortable avoidance, the familiar pattern of consumption, you are casting a different vote. Neither choice is neutral. Both are formative. The person you will be in 6 months is being shaped by these small, repeated choices that seem insignificant in the moment but accumulate into the architecture of your character. When we talk about what must happen in that 1 hour, we are really talking about the nature of the activity itself. Not all activity is equal. There is a fundamental difference between consuming and creating, between receiving and generating, between being shaped by external forces and actively shaping your own capacity. The world is organized to keep you in a state of perpetual consumption. Every platform, every device, every notification is designed to pull your attention outward, to keep you reacting, scrolling, responding, taking in more and more information without ever pausing to integrate it, to think about it, to transform it into something of your own. This is not accidental. There is an entire infrastructure built around the idea that your attention is a resource to be harvested. The economics of the modern world depend on keeping you in a state of mild distraction, engaged enough to stay on the platform but never so focused that you leave it behind to do something that generates no data, no clicks, no measurable engagement. The hour you claim is an act of resistance against this system, but it is a quiet resistance. It does not announce itself. It simply removes itself from the equation. What happens in that hour must be fundamentally different from what happens in the rest of your day. If the hour looks like everything else, if it feels like everything else, then it will produce the same results as everything else. The hour must be a rupture, a departure, a different kind of mental state. This is why the content of the hour matters so much. It is not enough to say you will spend an hour on something important. You must spend it on something that requires a different quality of attention, a different kind of effort, a different relationship with discomfort. Learning is one of the activities that belongs in this hour. Not the passive absorption of information, not the scrolling through articles you will forget by tomorrow, but the deliberate, effortful process of taking something you do not understand and working with it until you do. Real learning is uncomfortable. It involves confronting the limits of your current understanding, sitting with confusion, resisting the urge to move on before something has truly been integrated. This is why most learning does not happen. It is easier to consume content that makes you feel like you are learning without actually changing anything about how you think or what you can do. The kind of learning that belongs in the hour is the kind that leaves a trace. When you finish, something should be different. You should be able to do something you could not do before, or understand something that was previously opaque, or see a connection that was previously invisible. This does not happen through exposure. It happens through engagement. It happens when you slow down enough to think about what you are reading, to question it, to test it against your own experience, to see where it fits and where it does not. This requires a kind of mental endurance that is increasingly rare because it is increasingly unnecessary for most of what we do. Production is another activity that belongs in the hour. By production, I do not mean productivity in the conventional sense, the frantic completion of tasks that someone else has assigned to you. I mean the creation of something that did not exist before. Writing, building, designing, composing, coding, crafting. The specific form does not matter as much as the fact that you are bringing something into existence through your own effort. This is a fundamentally different cognitive process than consumption. When you create, you are forced to make decisions, to solve problems, to impose structure on chaos. You cannot be passive. You must be actively engaged in shaping the material, whatever that material is. Creation is difficult in a way that consumption is not. Consumption flows. It is easy to keep going, to take in more, to move from one thing to the next without friction. Creation resists. It requires you to stop, to focus, to work through the discomfort of not knowing what comes next, of facing the gap between what you want to make and what you are currently capable of making. This gap is where growth happens, but it is also where most people turn back. It is easier to watch someone else create than to face the awkwardness of your own early attempts. The hour must be protected from this temptation. It must be a space where you are willing to be bad at something, where you are willing to produce work that is not yet what you want it to be, where you accept that the first version of anything is rarely good but is necessary for the second version to exist. This requires a certain kind of humility, a willingness to be a beginner, to not know, to try and fail and try again without needing immediate validation or visible results. The results come later. The hour is where you put in the work that makes those results possible. Deep focus is the third element that defines the hour. Focus is not the same as attention. You can pay attention to many things in a scattered, surface-level way. Focus is sustained, directed, absorbed attention on a single object or task. It is the mental state where you lose track of time, where distractions fade into the background, where you are fully present with what you are doing. This state is increasingly difficult to access because our environments are designed to interrupt it. Every ping, every notification, every open tab is a small assault on the possibility of deep focus. The hour must be engineered to make focus possible. This means removing the sources of interruption before they occur. It means turning off the phone, closing the browser, putting yourself in a physical space where you will not be disturbed. It means creating a boundary between yourself and the world, not permanently, but for this specific period of time. This is not antisocial or isolationist. It is simply the recognition that certain kinds of work require certain kinds of conditions, and those conditions are not compatible with constant availability. Deep focus is where the most valuable work happens. It is where you solve the problems that cannot be solved in 5-minute increments between meetings. It is where you think thoughts that take longer than a tweet to formulate. It is where you build skills that require sustained practice over time. The hour is not long enough to complete most projects, but it is long enough to make real progress if you are truly focused. 1 hour of deep focus can accomplish more than 3 hours of distracted, fragmented effort. But focus is not just a technique. It is also a skill that atrophies when it is not used. If you spend most of your time in a state of divided attention, switching between tasks, responding to interruptions, your capacity for sustained focus diminishes. Your brain adapts to the environment you create for it. If the environment is chaotic, your mental state becomes chaotic. If the environment is calm and focused, your mental state follows. The hour is not just productive time. It is training time. You are training your mind to be capable of focus, to tolerate the discomfort of staying with one thing, to resist the pull of distraction. This brings us to what the hour is not. It is not consumption. It is not scrolling. It is not checking. It is not catching up. These activities have their place, but they do not belong in the hour. The hour is too valuable to spend on things that do not require your full capacity, that do not push you to grow, that leave you unchanged. Consumption is easy and endless. There will always be more to read, more to watch, more to take in. If you let consumption into the hour, it will expand to fill it, and the hour will become indistinguishable from the rest of your day. The discipline required here is not the discipline of forcing yourself to do something unpleasant. It is the discipline of protecting something valuable from everything else that wants to claim it. It is the discipline of saying no to good things so that you can say yes to better things. It is the discipline of recognizing that your default patterns, the things you do without thinking, are not necessarily aligned with what you actually want for your life. Most people do not lack time. They lack boundaries. They let the demands of the world, the expectations of others, the habits of convenience dictate how their time is spent. The hour is a boundary. It is a line you draw between what serves your growth and what merely fills the space. Drawing this line is uncomfortable because it requires you to disappoint people, to say no, to be unavailable, to prioritize something that may not have immediate social validation. But without this boundary, the hour dissolves. It becomes another casualty of the urgent and the available. There is also the question of what happens inside your mind during the hour. The external conditions matter, the removal of distractions, the choice of activity, but the internal state matters just as much. You must be willing to be bored. You must be willing to sit with the slow, unspectacular process of making progress that is not immediately visible. You must be willing to work without the dopamine hits of likes, comments, notifications, validation. This is harder than it sounds because we have been conditioned to expect constant feedback, constant stimulation, constant reassurance that we are doing something worthwhile. The hour offers none of this. The hour is often quiet, sometimes frustrating, occasionally tedious. There are no fireworks. There is just you and the work and the slow accumulation of effort that will eventually, if you keep showing up, result in something meaningful. But that result is not guaranteed in any single hour. It emerges over weeks and months of hours. This is why most people do not sustain the practice. They expect to feel different immediately. They expect the hour to be transformative in and of itself. It is not. The transformation is cumulative. You must also be willing to disconnect, not permanently, but temporarily. The hour requires a withdrawal from the external world, from the news, from the social feeds, from the constant stream of other people's thoughts and lives and opinions. This withdrawal is not about rejecting the world. It is about creating space for your own thoughts, your own work, your own development. You cannot hear yourself think if you are always listening to everyone else. You cannot develop your own perspective if you are always consuming someone else's. This disconnection is often uncomfortable because it creates a kind of silence that we are not used to. In that silence, you might notice things about yourself that were previously drowned out by noise. You might notice that you are anxious, or bored, or restless, or uncertain. You might notice that you have been using distraction to avoid feeling these things. The hour does not let you avoid them. It makes you face them, not dramatically, but simply by being present with yourself without the usual escape routes. Over time, this gets easier. The discomfort fades. What replaces it is a kind of steadiness, a confidence that comes from knowing you can sit with yourself, that you do not need constant external input to feel okay, that you are capable of sustained effort without immediate reward. This steadiness is one of the most valuable things the hour produces. It is not flashy. It does not show up in before and after photos. But it is the foundation of everything else. The cumulative effect of the hour is not linear. There will be days when it feels pointless, when you cannot see the progress, when you wonder why you are doing this. These days are part of the process. They are not evidence that the hour is not working. They are evidence that you are doing something difficult, something that resists easy measurement, something that requires faith in a process that does not offer constant proof of its value. The proof comes later, often in ways you do not expect. You might notice that you think more clearly. You might notice that you are less reactive, less pulled around by every stimulus, more capable of choosing your response. You might notice that you have built something, learned something, developed a capacity that was not there before. These changes are subtle at first. They do not announce themselves. But they compound. The person you are after 6 months of daily hours is noticeably different from the person you were before, not because of any single hour, but because of the accumulated weight of all of them. This is why the hour must be daily. Not because daily practice is inherently virtuous, but because the benefits of the hour depend on consistency. The brain adapts to what you do regularly, not what you do occasionally. If the hour is sporadic, if it happens only when you feel like it or when you have time, it will not have the same effect. It will remain an anomaly in your life rather than a foundation. The power of the hour comes from its regularity, from the fact that it is non-negotiable, from the fact that it happens whether you feel motivated or not. Motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes. It is not a good foundation for anything important. Discipline is different. Discipline is the decision, made once, that this is how you will spend this time, and then the repeated execution of that decision regardless of how you feel. Discipline is not about being hard on yourself or forcing yourself to suffer. It is about being consistent with your commitments, about doing what you said you would do, about building trust with yourself. Every time you show up for the hour, you are building that trust. Every time you skip it, you are eroding it. This is not about guilt or shame. It is about causality. If you want to be the kind of person who can be counted on, who follows through, who makes things happen, you must practice being that person. The hour is the practice. It is where you prove to yourself that you are capable of doing difficult things consistently, not because someone is watching, not because there is immediate reward, but because you decided it matters. The identity shift that happens through the hour is subtle but profound. You stop seeing yourself as someone who wants to be disciplined and start seeing yourself as someone who is disciplined. You stop seeing yourself as someone who wants to create and start seeing yourself as someone who creates. These shifts are not achieved through affirmations or visualization. They are achieved through action, repeated so many times that they become part of who you are. This is why the content of the hour matters so much. It is not just about productivity or achievement. It is about identity formation. You are teaching yourself who you are through what you do consistently. If you consistently choose creation over consumption, focus over distraction, depth over surface, you become someone for whom these choices are natural, not forced. The hour is the laboratory where you experiment with being a different version of yourself, and through repetition, that experimental version becomes the default. There is no shortcut to this process. There is no hack that allows you to skip the accumulation of hours. The culture around productivity often suggests otherwise, offering systems and techniques and optimizations that promise to make you more effective in less time. Some of these tools are useful, but they cannot replace the fundamental requirement of sustained effort over time. The hour is not efficient. It is effective. Efficiency is about doing things quickly. Effectiveness is about doing things that matter. The hour also teaches you something about the nature of time itself. We tend to think of time as something that happens to us, something we are subjected to, something we never have enough of. But time is also something we create through our choices. When you protect the hour, you are creating time. You are deciding that this time exists for this purpose and nothing else. This is a kind of power that most people do not realize they have. They believe they are victims of their circumstances, that they do not have time, that they are too busy. But busy is a choice. So is focus. The final thing that must happen in the hour is this: you must be willing to be alone with your own thoughts, your own limitations, your own slow progress. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire practice. We live in a world that constantly distracts us from ourselves, that offers endless ways to avoid the discomfort of introspection, of self-awareness, of sitting with who we actually are rather than who we imagine ourselves to be. The hour removes those distractions. It puts you face to face with yourself. What you discover in that confrontation is not always comfortable. You might discover that you are not as disciplined as you thought. You might discover that you avoid difficulty more than you realized. You might discover that you have been living reactively, responding to whatever comes your way rather than actively shaping your days according to your values. These discoveries are valuable. They are the beginning of real change. You cannot change what you do not see. The hour makes you see. Over time, this self-awareness deepens. You begin to notice patterns in your thinking, habits in your behavior, triggers that send you toward distraction or avoidance. You begin to understand yourself as a system, not a mystery. And with that understanding comes the possibility of intervention, of choosing differently, of interrupting the automatic patterns that do not serve you. This is not self-improvement in the superficial sense. This is structural change. This is becoming someone different at the level of default behavior. The hour is where this happens. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But steadily. One day at a time. One choice at a time. One repetition at a time. Until the hour is no longer something you have to force yourself to do. Until it becomes the part of your day you look forward to, the part where you feel most like yourself, most capable, most alive. This is the transformation the hour offers. Not a new set of skills, though you will acquire those. Not a list of accomplishments, though you will create those too. But a different relationship with yourself, with your time, with your capacity. A relationship built on trust, consistency, and the quiet knowledge that you are capable of more than you thought. There is something else that emerges from the practice of the hour, something that is harder to name but equally important. It is a kind of internal authority, a sense that you are the author of your own days rather than a character in someone else's story. Most people live reactively, responding to demands, accommodating expectations, filling the spaces between obligations with whatever is easiest or most immediately gratifying. There is nothing inherently wrong with this. It is how most of human life has always been organized. But it is not the only way. The hour represents an alternative. It is a space where you decide what matters, where you act according to your own priorities rather than someone else's urgency. This shift from reactive to intentional living does not happen all at once. It begins in the hour, in that protected space where you have chosen what to do and are following through on that choice. But over time, the mindset cultivated in the hour begins to spread. You start to notice other areas of your life where you are being reactive, where you are letting circumstances dictate your behavior, where you are defaulting to the path of least resistance. And because you have practiced making different choices in the hour, you begin to realize that you can make different choices elsewhere too. The hour teaches you that you have more agency than you thought. Not unlimited agency. You cannot control everything. You cannot eliminate all constraints. But within the constraints that exist, there is usually more room for choice than you initially perceive. The reason you do not see these choices is not because they do not exist, but because you have not practiced looking for them. You have accepted certain patterns as inevitable when they are actually just habitual. The hour breaks the inevitability. It shows you that change is possible, that you can do things differently, that consistency is within your reach. One of the subtle ways the hour changes you is by altering your relationship with difficulty. When you first begin the practice, the hour is often uncomfortable. It requires effort. It demands focus. It does not offer the easy pleasures of passive consumption. Your initial instinct might be to avoid it, to find reasons why today is not a good day, why you should start tomorrow instead. But if you push through this resistance enough times, something shifts. The discomfort becomes familiar. It loses its power to deter you. You realize that difficulty is not a signal to stop but simply a feature of the work, something to be expected and managed rather than avoided. This is a profound shift because most of what matters in life involves some degree of difficulty. Building relationships requires navigating conflict and misunderstanding. Pursuing meaningful work requires dealing with failure and criticism. Growing as a person requires confronting aspects of yourself that you would prefer to ignore. If you have not developed a tolerance for difficulty, you will avoid all of these things, not consciously, but through the accumulated weight of small decisions to choose comfort over challenge. The hour is a daily practice in choosing challenge, in sitting with discomfort, in doing the thing even when it would be easier not to. Over time, this practice makes you more resilient, not in the sense of being unaffected by difficulty, but in the sense of being able to continue through it. You learn that discomfort is temporary, that it does not mean you are doing something wrong, that it is often a sign that you are doing something right, something that is pushing you beyond your current capacity. This learning cannot be rushed. It has to be experienced, repeatedly, until it becomes part of your operating system. The hour also teaches you about the difference between intention and attention. Many people have good intentions. They want to learn, to create, to grow. But intention without attention is just wishful thinking. Attention is what transforms intention into reality. It is the sustained focus that takes an abstract desire and turns it into concrete action. The hour is where you practice this transformation. You take the intention to learn something, to build something, to develop a skill, and you give it your full attention for a defined period of time. This is how wishes become outcomes. What makes this difficult is that attention is a limited resource. You cannot give full attention to everything. You must choose. And choosing means saying no to other things, good things, appealing things. This is where most people stumble. They want to do everything. They do not want to miss out. They want to keep all their options open. But this approach leads to a kind of diluted engagement where you are touching many things but mastering none, where you are busy but not effective, where you are consuming but not creating. The hour forces a different approach. It says, for this period of time, this is the only thing that matters. Everything else can wait. This is not about being rigid or inflexible. It is about being clear. It is about recognizing that depth requires focus, and focus requires exclusion. You cannot go deep if you are constantly skimming the surface of multiple things. The hour gives you permission to go deep, to ignore everything else for a while, to let the world continue without your constant monitoring. There is a particular kind of fear that arises when you first start protecting the hour. It is the fear that you will miss something, that something important will happen while you are disconnected, that you will fall behind. This fear is not entirely irrational. The world does continue. Things do happen. But what you realize over time is that very little of what happens requires your immediate attention. Most of what feels urgent is not actually urgent. It is just loud. The truly important things can wait an hour. And if they cannot, someone will find you. What you gain by disconnecting far outweighs what you might miss. You gain clarity. You gain the ability to think your own thoughts rather than reacting to someone else's. You gain the space to work on things that matter to you rather than things that happen to be in front of you. You gain a sense of control over your own attention, which is increasingly rare in a world designed to capture and monetize that attention. These gains are not trivial. They are foundational to living a life that feels like your own rather than something that is happening to you. The practice of the hour also reveals something about the nature of progress. We tend to think of progress as something that should be visible, measurable, immediate. We want to see results. We want to know that we are moving forward. But most meaningful progress is invisible for a long time. It is happening beneath the surface, in the slow accumulation of knowledge, the gradual refinement of skill, the steady building of capacity. You cannot see it day to day. You might not even see it week to week. But if you look back after 6 months, after a year, the change is undeniable. This is why patience is so critical to the practice. Not passive patience, not waiting for something to happen, but active patience, the kind that continues to show up and do the work even when the results are not yet visible. This is difficult in a culture that values speed, that celebrates overnight success, that suggests there is always a faster way if you can just find the right hack. The hour rejects this narrative. It says, there is no shortcut. There is only the work. And the work takes time. But here is what the hour also teaches you. Time is going to pass anyway. 6 months from now will arrive whether you spend the hour productively or not. A year from now will come regardless of what you do today. The only question is who you will be when you get there. The hour is a bet on your future self. It is an investment in becoming someone different, someone more capable, someone who has done the work that most people are not willing to do. This is not about superiority. It is about specificity. It is about choosing a particular path and walking it consistently. One of the reasons the hour works is that it is bounded. It has a clear beginning and end. This makes it manageable. You are not committing to work on something forever. You are committing to work on it for 1 hour. This limitation is paradoxically liberating. It removes the overwhelm that comes from thinking about how much there is to do, how far you have to go, how long it will take. You do not have to think about any of that. You just have to think about the next hour. And then, when that hour is done, you can think about the next one. This approach breaks enormous tasks into human-sized pieces. You cannot write a book in a day. But you can write for an hour. You cannot master a language in a week. But you can study for an hour. You cannot build a business overnight. But you can work on it for an hour. The hour is the unit of progress. It is the container within which meaningful work happens. And when you stack enough hours together, when you accumulate enough of these small, focused sessions, you eventually arrive at outcomes that seemed impossible at the start. The key to avoiding this outcome is to make the hour non-negotiable. Not in a rigid, inflexible way, but in a way that recognizes its importance. The hour is not a luxury. It is not something you do if you have time. It is a priority. It is one of the few things in your life that is truly under your control, that depends only on you, that no one else can do for you. Everything else in your day is negotiable. The hour is not. This mindset makes all the difference. When the hour is negotiable, it gets negotiated away. When it is non-negotiable, it happens. The identity of discipline is not just about the hour. It is about the larger pattern of your life. As you become someone who does the hour, you become someone who finishes things, who follows through, who does not quit when things get difficult. These qualities radiate outward. They affect how you approach your work, your relationships, your health, your goals. You start to hold yourself to a different standard, not because you are judging yourself harshly, but because you know what you are capable of. You have seen yourself show up consistently for something that matters. And once you have seen that, you cannot unsee it. It becomes part of how you understand yourself. This is the real power of the hour. It is not just about what you produce or what you learn. It is about who you prove yourself to be. Every hour is a test. Every day you show up, you pass the test. And as the tests accumulate, as you pass them again and again, you develop a quiet confidence that is not based on arrogance or bravado but on evidence. You know you are disciplined because you have been disciplined. You know you are capable because you have demonstrated capability. This knowledge is unshakable. It does not depend on external validation or approval. It is grounded in your own experience. The transformation that occurs over months is profound, but it is not always visible to others. People might not notice that you are different. They might not comment on your growth. This is fine. The transformation is not for them. It is for you. It is the internal shift from uncertainty to confidence, from inconsistency to reliability, from wishful thinking to demonstrated capability. This shift changes how you move through the world. It changes what you attempt. It changes what you believe is possible. And all of this begins in the simple, repeated act of protecting an hour. There is also a kind of compound effect in how the hour changes your relationship with time. At first, an hour might feel like a long time, something that requires significant willpower to protect. But as you practice, as you experience what can be accomplished in a focused hour, your perception shifts. An hour begins to feel like a powerful tool, a concentrated block of potential that can be directed toward anything that matters. You stop thinking of time as something you do not have enough of and start thinking of it as something you can shape and direct. This shift is subtle but transformative. It moves you from a scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset, not because you suddenly have more time, but because you have learned to use time more intentionally. The months pass. The hours accumulate. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you become someone different. Not in a dramatic, overnight way, but in a deep, structural way. Your defaults change. What used to require effort becomes automatic. What used to feel difficult becomes normal. You have raised your baseline. And from this new baseline, you can reach for things that were previously out of reach. This is how growth happens. Not in leaps, but in the steady accumulation of small improvements that eventually add up to something significant. The identity of discipline, once formed, becomes self-reinforcing. The more you act in accordance with this identity, the stronger it becomes. The stronger it becomes, the easier it is to act in accordance with it. This creates a virtuous cycle where discipline begets more discipline, where consistency begets more consistency. You are no longer fighting against yourself. You are working with yourself. Your habits and your goals are aligned. Your actions and your identity are congruent. This alignment is what makes sustained change possible. Without it, you are constantly battling internal resistance. With it, you have momentum. But this process takes time. There is no shortcut to identity formation. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You cannot visualize it into existence. You cannot affirm it into being. You must live it into reality. You must act as the person you want to become, repeatedly, consistently, until the acting becomes being. The hour is where this acting happens. It is the stage on which you rehearse the person you are becoming. And with enough rehearsals, the performance becomes the reality. One of the most powerful aspects of this transformation is that it gives you a method for approaching any future challenge. Once you have experienced the compound effect, once you have seen what consistent effort over time can produce, you have a template. You know how to change. You know that it starts with a decision, that it requires consistency, that it takes time, that it works. This knowledge is incredibly valuable. It means you are no longer at the mercy of your circumstances. You have a tool. You have a process. You have proof that you can become whoever you need to become by doing what that person would do, day after day, until it is no longer something you are doing but something you are. The closing truth of all this is simple but profound. You do not need to change your entire life to change your life. You do not need to overhaul everything at once. You do not need a perfect plan or ideal circumstances. You need to own an hour. 1 hour of your day, protected and directed towards something that matters. That hour, repeated across days and weeks and months, will compound into a transformation that touches everything. It will change what you can do, what you know, who you are. It will prove to you that you are capable of far more than you currently believe. Most people spend their lives waiting for the right moment to begin. They wait for more time, more energy, more clarity, more confidence. But the right moment is always now. The right action is always the next hour. Everything else is delay. Everything else is avoidance dressed up as prudence. The hour does not require you to have everything figured out. It requires you to begin. It requires you to show up. It requires you to do the work. And if you do that, if you protect that hour and use it intentionally, everything else will follow. This is not motivational rhetoric. This is not empty encouragement. This is the testimony of the process itself. The hour works. It has always worked. It will work for you. But only if you commit to it. Only if you protect it. Only if you show up, day after day, regardless of how you feel, regardless of what else is happening, regardless of whether anyone notices or cares. The hour is yours. No one else can do it for you. No one else can give you the identity it produces. You must earn it. You must build it. You must live it into existence. The compound effect of an hour is not magic. It is math. It is the inevitable result of consistent action over time. It is what happens when you stop negotiating with yourself and start executing. It is what happens when you value long-term transformation over short-term comfort. It is what happens when you decide that who you become matters more than how you feel in any given moment. And the beautiful thing about math is that it is reliable. It does not care about your doubts or your fears or your past failures. It simply calculates. And the calculation says that if you show up for the hour, if you do it consistently, if you give it time to compound, you will change. You will grow. You will become someone different. To change your life, you do not need to change your entire day. You need to own 1 hour of it. That hour, protected and purposeful, is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. Because in that hour, you are not just working on a task or learning a skill or building something external. You are building yourself. You are constructing the identity that will carry you through the rest of your life. You are proving that you are capable of discipline, of focus, of sustained effort. And once you have proven that to yourself, once you have lived it long enough that it becomes who you are, there is nothing you cannot do. The hour is not a technique. It is not a hack. It is a commitment. It is a way of living. It is a declaration that you will not be passive, that you will not let your life happen to you, that you will take responsibility for becoming the person you want to be. And that responsibility begins with a single hour. Protect it. Use it. Repeat it. And watch as everything changes. Conclusion: own your hour, transform your life. We have reached the end of this exploration, but in many ways, this is where the real work begins. Everything you have encountered in these chapters, every principle, every insight, every psychological mechanism, they all remain theoretical until you make a single decision. The decision to claim 1 hour of your life and make it sacred. Not someday. Not when things settle down. Today. Right now. This moment is where transformation becomes possible, or remains forever a distant dream. Let us look back at what we have uncovered together. We started with a simple but profound observation. Small blocks of time, used with intention and consistency, produce results that far exceed what most people believe possible. An hour feels insignificant when measured against the enormity of our ambitions. We look at where we want to be and the gap feels so vast that an hour seems almost insulting, like bringing a teaspoon to drain an ocean. But this perception is built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how change actually works. Change does not happen in grand gestures. It does not arrive through heroic efforts that we can only sustain for short bursts before collapsing back into our default patterns. Real change, lasting change, the kind of change that rewrites who you are at the deepest level, happens through repetition. Through rhythm. Through showing up in the same way, at the same time, day after day, until the new behavior is no longer something you do but something you are. This is what the brain requires. Not inspiration. Not willpower. But predictable patterns that it can encode into automatic behaviors. Your brain is not designed for constant novelty and decision-making. It is designed for efficiency. It wants to conserve energy, to create shortcuts, to turn repeated actions into habits that require minimal conscious effort. When you fight against this design, when you rely on motivation and force yourself to make fresh decisions every day about whether and when to work on what matters, you are working against your own neurobiology. You will lose that fight eventually. Not because you are weak, but because you are human. The 1-hour rule works with your brain instead of against it. By fixing the time, by making it non-negotiable, by showing up whether you feel like it or not, you are giving your brain exactly what it needs to make the behavior automatic. You are building neural pathways. You are strengthening synaptic connections. You are moving the behavior from the prefrontal cortex, which requires enormous energy and willpower, to the basal ganglia, which handles automatic actions with minimal effort. This is not metaphor. This is measurable neuroscience. Every time you honor your dedicated hour, you are physically changing the structure of your brain. But we also examined why most people never experience this transformation. Why they start with enthusiasm and fade within weeks. Why they cycle through endless attempts at change without ever achieving the consistency that makes change permanent. The reasons are clear once you look beneath the surface. First, there is the problem of attention. We live in an environment engineered to fracture our focus. Every notification, every alert, every carefully designed interface pulling at our awareness, competing for the most valuable resource we have. Our attention has become a battleground, and most of us have surrendered without even realizing we were in a fight. When your attention is fragmented, you cannot do deep work. You cannot think complex thoughts. You cannot practice at the level required for mastery. You skim the surface of everything and go deep into nothing. And then you wonder why you are not progressing, why you are not improving, why you feel stuck. The answer is not that you lack talent or potential. The answer is that you have allowed your attention to be stolen, piece by piece, until you no longer have the capacity for the sustained focus that transformation requires. Reclaiming your hour is, first and foremost, about reclaiming your attention. Then there is decision fatigue. Every choice you make, no matter how small, depletes your mental resources. What to wear, what to eat, which email to answer first, whether to work out now or later. By the time you finally sit down to do the work that matters, you have already exhausted yourself with 1,000 micro-decisions. This is why waiting to see when you can fit in your important work is a losing strategy. You are asking yourself to make a decision at the moment when you are least capable of making it well. But when you fix your hour in advance, you eliminate the decision. You decided once. Now you simply execute. This single shift, this removal of daily negotiation, conserves enormous mental energy that you can redirect toward the actual work. And perhaps most insidiously, there is the trap of motivation dependence. We have been taught to wait for motivation, to seek inspiration, to work on our goals only when we feel energized and ready. This sounds reasonable. It feels intuitive. But it is completely backwards. Motivation is not the cause of action. It is the result of action. When you start working, even when you do not feel like it, motivation often appears after you begin. But if you wait for motivation to start, you will wait forever, because motivation does not come to people who are sitting still. This is why the 1-hour rule requires you to show up regardless of how you feel. Not because feelings do not matter, but because feelings are unreliable guides for important decisions. You will not feel motivated every day. You will not feel inspired every day. Some days you will feel tired, distracted, doubtful. And on those days, the practice is even more important, because those are the days when you are building real discipline. Discipline is not about the easy days when everything flows. Discipline is about the hard days when everything resists, and you do it anyway. We also confronted the uncomfortable truth that most people do not actually have a time problem. They have a priority problem. Everyone has the same 24 hours. The people who accomplish extraordinary things do not have more time. They have clearer priorities and the courage to protect those priorities from everything else that demands their attention. When you say you do not have time for something, what you are really saying is that it is not a priority. This is not a judgment. It is simply the truth. And recognizing this truth is liberating, because it means you are not a victim of circumstance. You are making choices, conscious or not, about how your time is used. The question is not whether you have time. The question is whether you are willing to make the thing you claim is important actually important in your behavior, not just in your words. Are you willing to say no to other things, good things even, to protect your dedicated hour? Are you willing to disappoint people, to miss out on events, to be unavailable for that specific block of time? Because that is what it takes. Not sometimes. Every day. This is where most people reveal that their stated priorities are not their actual priorities. Their behavior tells the truth that their words conceal. When you claim your hour and protect it fiercely, you are doing something profound. You are sending a message to yourself and to the world about what you value. You are declaring that your growth, your development, your transformation is not negotiable. It does not happen only when convenient. It does not get pushed aside when something else comes up. It happens every day, at the same time, no matter what. This declaration, lived out consistently, begins to reshape your identity. And this is where we arrive at perhaps the most important dimension of the 1-hour rule. It is not really about the skill you are developing or the project you are working on, though those things certainly matter. It is about who you are becoming in the process. Every time you sit down for your hour, especially on the days when you do not want to, you are casting a vote for a new identity. You are becoming someone who keeps commitments to themselves. Someone who values long-term growth over short-term comfort. Someone who understands that transformation is not a destination you arrive at but a practice you live. This identity does not announce itself. You will not wake up one morning feeling like a different person. The shift is gradual, almost imperceptible day to day. But it is real. After weeks of showing up, you start to trust yourself in a way you did not before. After months, you stop being surprised by your own consistency. After a year, you look back and realize you are no longer the person who started. Not because you changed everything about your life, but because you changed one thing, consistently, and that one thing changed everything else. The compounding effect of daily practice is something most people underestimate because they are focused on immediate results. They want to see dramatic progress now. They want the transformation to be visible and impressive. But real growth does not work on a timeline that satisfies our impatience. A single hour of practice produces almost no visible change. A week of practice feels like you are barely moving. Even a month might not show the results you hoped for. This is where most people quit. They decide the process is not working, that they are not improving fast enough, that they should try something else. But if you continue, if you resist the urge to abandon the process when it feels slow, something remarkable happens. The effects begin to compound. Each hour builds on the previous one. The neural pathways get stronger. The skills get sharper. The thinking gets clearer. What took enormous effort in month 1 takes moderate effort in month 3 and minimal effort in month 6. You look up one day and realize you can do things that seemed impossible when you started. Not because you suddenly became talented, but because you consistently practiced. This is the mathematics of transformation. 1 hour per day equals 7 hours per week. That is 28 hours per month. Over 300 hours per year. Think about what you could learn, create, or master with 300 hours of focused, undistracted practice. Most people never give 300 cumulative hours of genuine focus to anything in their entire lives. They are busy, certainly. They are working, absolutely. But their time is fragmented across dozens of competing priorities, none of which receive the sustained attention required for excellence. The 1 hour rule forces you to choose. What is worth 300 hours of your focused attention this year? What deserves that level of commitment? And here is the beautiful part. Once you have established this practice, once your brain has encoded it as automatic, once your identity has shifted to someone who does this work every day, you can apply the same principle to other areas of your life. The discipline you build in one domain transfers to others. The self-efficacy you develop, The evidence you gather that you are someone who finishes what they start, this becomes a foundation you can build on in every direction. You stop seeing yourself as someone who struggles with consistency. You start seeing yourself as someone who shows up. And that shift in self-perception changes everything. But let us be clear about what this requires. It requires you to give up the fantasy of dramatic transformation through heroic effort. It requires you to accept that most days will feel ordinary. There will be no applause, no recognition, no immediate reward. Just you and the work and the quiet knowledge that you are building something important. It requires you to value the process over the outcome, to trust that if you take care of the inputs, the outputs will take care of themselves. And it requires you to be patient with yourself, to understand that slow progress is still progress, that invisible growth is still growth. You will have hard days. Days when the hour feels like a burden instead of an opportunity. Days when you question whether any of this matters, whether you are wasting your time, whether you should just give up and accept that this is not who you are. These thoughts are normal. They are not evidence that you are on the wrong path. They are evidence that you are human, that you are pushing against the edges of your comfort zone, that you are trying to become something you have not been before. The key is to not believe every thought you have. The key is to show up anyway. There is something sacred about the act of showing up when you do not want to. Something that transcends the specific task you are working on. In that moment, you are practicing the fundamental skill that determines everything else in your life. The skill of doing what you said you would do, even when it is hard. The skill of honoring your commitments to yourself, even when no one is watching. The skill of choosing your future over your present comfort. These moments, these quiet acts of self-discipline, are where character is built. Not in the dramatic moments that make good stories, but in the ordinary moments that no one else sees. And over time, these moments accumulate into a life that looks very different from where you started. Not because you made one big decision that changed everything overnight, but because you made one small decision every single day, and those small decisions compounded into something extraordinary. This is how people who seem to have natural discipline actually developed it. This is how people who appear to have unlimited willpower actually built it. They did not start with some special advantage. They started with a decision to claim 1 hour and protect it. And they did not stop. So what now? What do you do with everything you have learned? The answer is simple, though not easy. You decide. You decide what deserves your most focused attention. You decide when that hour will be. You decide that starting today, not tomorrow, not next week, but today, you will show up for that hour. And then you do it. Not perfectly. You will miss days. You will struggle. You will doubt. But you do not quit. You keep showing up. You keep honoring the commitment. You keep casting votes for the person you are becoming. Remember this. You are not trying to change your entire life overnight. You are not trying to become perfect. You are not competing with anyone else's progress or timeline. You are simply taking 1 hour of your day, the same hour every day, and making it matter. You are choosing to stop waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect feeling, and starting with what you have, where you are, right now. This is enough. In fact, this is everything. The truth is, you do not need more time. You do not need better circumstances. You do not need to wait until things are less busy or less complicated or less chaotic. You need to decide that 1 hour of your day belongs to your growth, and then protect that hour as if your future depends on it. Because it does. Not in a dramatic, all-or-nothing way. But in the quiet, cumulative way that real change always works. 1 hour at a time. 1 day at a time. 1 decision at a time. You do not find time. You create it. You decide it. You claim it. And when you do, when you finally stop negotiating with yourself about whether today is the day to start, when you finally commit to the simple but profound practice of showing up for 1 hour every day, you will discover something remarkable. The life you want is not some distant possibility that requires years of sacrifice and suffering. It is being built right now, in this hour, through the choices you make about how to use it. Own your hour. Own your life. The rest will follow. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Everything you need is already within you. The only question is whether you will give yourself the gift of consistency, the gift of showing up, the gift of one dedicated hour every single day. The answer to that question will determine everything else. Choose wisely. Choose today. Choose now. But before you close this book and move forward, there is one more layer we need to explore. Because knowing what to do is not the same as doing it. Understanding the principles is not the same as living them. And the gap between knowledge and action is where most transformations die. So let us talk about what happens in the days and weeks after you make this decision. Let us talk about the reality of building this practice in a world that does not care about your 1 hour, in a life that will continue to pull at you from every direction. The first thing you need to understand is that your environment will not change to accommodate your new commitment. Your phone will still buzz with notifications. Your colleagues will still send emails that feel urgent. Your family will still have needs and requests. The world operates on its own rhythm, and it will not pause because you have decided to claim an hour for yourself. This means you must become the force that creates the boundary. You must be the one who says no, who turns off the phone, who closes the door, who protects the hour from everything that tries to consume it. This will feel uncomfortable at first. You may feel selfish. You may worry that people will think you are being difficult or unavailable. You may second-guess whether this hour is really worth the small conflicts it creates. But here is what you need to remember. The people who love you, who truly want the best for you, will understand. They may not understand immediately. They may need time to adjust to this new boundary. But eventually they will see the change in you, the focus, the calm, the sense of purpose, and they will respect what you are building. And the people who do not understand, who continue to pressure you to abandon your commitment, they are revealing something important. They are showing you that their needs matter more to them than your growth. You do not owe those people your hour. There is also a deeper discomfort you will face, one that has nothing to do with external pressure. When you sit down for your dedicated hour, especially in the beginning, you will confront yourself in a way that most people avoid. Without distractions, without the constant input and stimulation you have grown accustomed to, you will come face to face with your own thoughts, your own doubts, your own restlessness. This is not a flaw in the process. This is the process. You are learning to be with yourself, to work through discomfort without reaching for an escape, to sit in the space between where you are and where you want to be without needing immediate relief. Most people cannot tolerate this discomfort, so they fill every moment with noise. Podcasts, music, social media, anything to avoid the silence. But transformation happens in the silence. Growth happens in the discomfort. When you learn to sit with the restlessness and continue working anyway, you are developing a capacity that will serve you in every area of your life. You are learning that discomfort is not dangerous. It is just uncomfortable. And you are stronger than your discomfort. Now, let us talk about what happens when you inevitably miss a day. Because you will. Life is unpredictable. Emergencies happen. You get sick. You travel. Something genuinely important interrupts your hour. The question is not whether you will miss a day. The question is what you will do after you miss it. This is the moment when most people give up. They miss one day, then they tell themselves they have already broken the streak, so what is the point, and they miss another day, and another, until the practice disappears completely and they are back where they started. But missing one day does not erase all the days you showed up. It does not undo the neural pathways you built. It does not invalidate your commitment. What matters is how quickly you return. If you miss a day, you show up the next day. Not with guilt, not with self-punishment, but with the simple recognition that you are human and today is a new opportunity. The practice is not about perfection. It is about consistency over time. It is about the overall pattern, not the individual exception. One missed day in a month of consistent practice is irrelevant. One missed day that becomes a week, that becomes a month, that is where the problem lies. So when you miss a day, and you will, do not spiral. Do not use it as evidence that you are not cut out for this. Do not abandon the whole practice because you stumbled once. Just show up again. That is the entire skill. Showing up again after you fall. This resilience, this ability to course correct without drama or self-judgment, this is what separates people who transform their lives from people who keep starting over. There is also something important to understand about the nature of the work you do during your hour. It will evolve. What you need to focus on today may not be what you need to focus on in 3 months. Your hour is not a rigid container that must always hold the same activity. It is a protected space for whatever serves your growth most in this season of your life. Maybe you start by learning a new skill. After months of practice, maybe you shift to creating something with that skill. Later, maybe you use the hour to deepen your thinking, to solve complex problems, to refine your craft at a higher level. The key is to stay connected to the purpose of the hour. It is not about busy work. It is not about checking boxes or following a plan because you wrote it down once. It is about growth. It is about moving toward the person you want to become. So periodically, maybe once a month, take a few minutes to assess. Is what I am doing during this hour still serving my growth? Is there something more important I should be focusing on? Am I staying true to the principle of creation over consumption? These small moments of reflection keep the practice alive and meaningful, rather than letting it become another routine you follow without thinking. And as the months pass, as the practice becomes woven into the fabric of your life, you will notice something subtle but profound. The way you relate to time itself begins to change. You stop feeling like time is something that happens to you, something you are constantly chasing, never quite catching. You start to feel a sense of sovereignty over your time. Not all of it, you still have obligations and responsibilities, but at least this 1 hour. This hour is yours. You decide what happens during it. And this small pocket of control, this daily reminder that you have agency, it radiates outward into the rest of your life. You start making better decisions about how you use your other hours. You start recognizing when you are drifting into consumption instead of creation, when you are reacting instead of choosing, when you are letting others dictate your priorities instead of protecting your own. The 1 hour rule does not just change what happens during the hour. It changes your entire relationship with how you spend your time. It wakes you up to the reality that time is the only non-renewable resource you have, and how you use it is the most important decision you make every single day. There will be moments, probably many of them, when you question whether this hour is making a difference. When the progress feels too slow, when the work feels too hard, when you look at how far you still have to go and feel discouraged. In those moments, I want you to remember something. You are not just working on a skill or a project. You are working on yourself. You are building the most important thing you will ever build, which is the capacity to show up for your own life. Every hour you sit down and do the work, even when you do not want to, you are strengthening that capacity. You are proving to yourself that you are reliable, that you are committed, that you are becoming someone who does what they say they will do. And this version of you, this person who shows up consistently, who honors their commitments, who values growth over comfort, this person can accomplish things that the old version of you could never have imagined. Not because you suddenly gained some special power, but because you built a foundation of self-trust that allows you to take on bigger challenges, knowing you will see them through. This is the real transformation. Not the external results, though those will come. The internal shift in who you know yourself to be. So as you step away from these pages and into your life, as you prepare to claim your hour and begin this practice, I want to leave you with this final thought. Your life will not change because you read this book. Your life will change because you decided to do something different. And the beautiful thing is, you do not have to change everything. You do not have to overhaul your entire existence or make dramatic sacrifices. You just have to claim 1 hour. Protect it. Show up for it. Do the work during it. And trust that this one small decision, repeated daily, will compound into a life you barely recognize a year from now. The hour is waiting. It has always been there, hidden in the folds of your day, waiting for you to claim it. The question was never whether you have time. The question was always whether you would choose to use it differently. You have that power. You have always had it. And starting today, starting with this next hour of your life, you can step into it. Not perfectly. Not with all the answers. But with commitment. With intention. With the understanding that transformation is not a destination but a practice, and the practice begins now. Own your hour. Own your transformation. Own your life. Everything else will follow.